Question often arises as to why no one in London ever wants to talk about this. Why all of a sudden in 2015 when I published Murder City, this was like a big reveal. And everybody actually knew it, but nobody had consolidated the information, was prepared to come forward and say London was the serial killer capital. So I'm Dr. Michael Arnfield. I'm a professor and criminologist here at Western University. I founded the Cold Case Society, which is an unsolved crimes think tank here back in 2011. I've been tenured since 2013. Prior to that, I was a police officer in London and a detective for 15 years.
I'm Vanessa Brown, and I'm the author of The Forest City Killer. I have lived in London my entire life.
From this period, there are obviously 3 identified confirmed killers. This is widely known. Christian McGee, Gerald Thomas Archer, and Russell Maurice Johnson, aka the Balcony Strangler.
The main barrier for the average person to look up stuff about these cases online is privacy. So Canada has really strident privacy laws that make it, and law enforcement is able to basically keep all of this stuff in a trap. And no one can access it. Even the most legitimate journalists and investigative reporters will have trouble accessing this material.
I think we see commonalities in modus operandi that are really just parts of when you kill somebody. And the repetition of murder with stranger on stranger murder, this is sexually motivated, right? These are compulsive sexual crimes. So there are certain things that are common just because they're sort of sexual.
The consistency principle is that offenders with certain common characteristics who exhibit these, again, same preferred MOs are consistent over time with those same methodologies. So someone who targets, for instance, teenage females and exhibits a certain MO and a certain signature and certain what we call paraphilias, which are disordered sexual fantasy-based attachments to people, places, and things, will do that time and again. And in the London case, we see that these are all over the map. In terms of Dennis Alsop's notes, Dennis Alsop Sr. retired 23 years before I became a police officer. I never met him. I know him through his notes. I know him, I can hear his inner voice. I know his instincts. I know his methodologies. He's out there at night, lurking around, looking for loose ends. I feel I know him through his writings.
The public most often does not have access to those materials in Canada. So he took home notes that are supposed to be proprietary. They're not supposed to be open to the public. And in leaving them with his family after he died, he allowed those notes to become part of the public narrative. If the law enforcement officials, the OPP, the London police would utilize some of the resources that have been offered to them, such as people who do genetic genealogy in the United States, and they've been offered these for free. We've had huge names in the true crime world offer to pay for these genetic tests for these London victims. They could anytime. They just don't. I don't know why they don't. It's bizarre to me.
The question often comes up, why was London, Ontario sort of the Goldilocks city for serial killers? Why was this a destination city? And there's no single variable, there's no single explanation, there's a multiplicity of explanations, but one that stands out when we look at comparative figures in cities in the US is the construction of the King's Highway system.
Interstates and large highway systems are significant to serial killers in general. So something they found is a correlation between habitual sexual killers and people who habitually drive. There's a really strong correlation between serial killers and compulsive driving. They love to drive. So being near a highway just matches that behavior.
London has a number of other issues now that it has to deal with. London has never been particularly effective at discussing or dealing with its issues. The current trend seems to be towards less serial sex killers as much as it is people preying on vulnerable populations, sex trade workers, homeless, the people with substance issues, or violence within those communities itself. So while they're not directly connected to this same period and these same offenders 30, 40, 50 even years later, they reflect the same inequities and lack of, I think, self-reflection that has always plagued this city, and it will always plague this city. No one wants to talk about London's underbelly, whether it was in the 60s and the fact that there were sexual serial predators targeting children, or whether it's now and the fact that the city is rotting and has US per capita US level violent crime. It's always going to be an issue, and that ultimately is the albatross around this city's neck.
You know, in London, there's a culture of silence in regards to these killings. People still don't want to talk about it. In fact, when Forest City Killer came out, the mayor sent a memo around to all of the city councilors saying not to talk about London's history as a serial killer capital. They just don't want it to come up. And it was the same thing in the 1960s.
London, and this is in part why this problem was allowed to fester. London has been always a compartmentalized, sort of siloed, gerrymandered city, whereby the East End doesn't know what's going on in the West End, the North End doesn't know what's going on in the South End, and you have people with mismanaged expectations about what this city actually is. And for that reason, nobody shares information. That's why cases go unsolved. You might figure out if a certain blend of coffee works well, but you're never going to find the answer as to who killed Jacqueline Dunleavy. What we're seeing now in terms of familial DNA, in terms of what we call genomics, so forensic genealogy, in terms of linking offenders, not just through the conventional legacy DNA data bank, but through their family trees, for a reasonable expense. All of the London cases with DNA are probably solvable in the next year if they're prepared to turn them over to one of two labs in the US specializing in this. And I'm hopeful that they will.